This is the Trøndelag Folk Museum in Norway. Dozens of historic buildings from all over the country are gathered in the open air in the city of Trondheim. The unique exhibit is also called Sverresborg, like the castle of the Norwegian King Sverre Sigurdsson, which once stood nearby. Only ruins remain of the medieval structure. During the excavation of the fortress, one find simply stunned the archaeologists. Almost a century ago, fragments of a human skeleton were discovered in an ancient well. Only decades later did scientists figure out how the bones ended up in the pit. The key to the puzzle was in an ancient saga about Sverrir. This saga belongs to the genre of Icelandic royal sagas. It tells the story of a certain Sverrir, or in modern Norwegian, Sverre, who was a priest in the Faroe Islands. But then he suddenly claimed that his mother said he was the illegitimate son of King Sigurd II of Norway, and he came to Norway, raised a rebellion there, relying on the poor, and after a long war he managed to defeat King Magnus of Norway. In 1184 he united Norway under his rule. Not everyone was happy with the new ruler. The church and the noble feudal lords were unhappy with the impostor, and the people also doubted Sverre Sigurdsson's legitimate right to the throne. Moreover, the European Hordrode dynasty also claimed the Norwegian crown. As a result, in 1194 civil war broke out again in the state, and, as the ancient saga tells, the competitors in the struggle for power literally found a way to poison the life of Sverre Sigurdsson and his subjects. In 1297, the opponents took the fortress and poisoned the spring there, burying a dead man there. The corpse with its cadaveric poisons was supposed to poison the well so that it could not be used afterwards. The archaeologists were amazed when they found this man in the same place where it was described, and thus the events described in the saga were confirmed. The dead man thrown into the well is a vivid example of ancient biological warfare. This method of harming enemies has been known since ancient times. Contaminated water, if it doesn't kill, will certainly incapacitate the enemy for a long time. During the decomposition of the corpse, chemical substances that poison the water will be released, and microorganisms may also develop. These are bacteria that can have a negative impact on human health. When the processes of decay are already underway, naturally, this can have a negative effect, up to and including a fatal outcome. In ancient times, there were other varieties of biological weapons. The Romans soaked spears, swords, axes, and darts in the juice of yew berries, which caused swelling with blisters and even paralysis. Before battle, the Scythians treated their arrows with a mixture of snake venom, manure, and human blood. This composition ensured a painful death for the wounded enemy. During the Peloponnesian War, the Spartans set fire to logs with pieces of sulfur and literally smoked the enemy out of hiding with a gas with a pungent odor. Sometimes the bodies of people who had died from terrible diseases were thrown into cities, and they waited for the plague to begin. Although all these methods were common practice, they were considered barbaric even in ancient times. There was a kind of unspoken code of warfare that condemned the use of such tactics. The ancient Indian laws of Manu prohibited the use of poisoned weapons, or, for example, incendiary weapons, or any secret weapons at all. But, of course, these laws were often violated in real life. For example, the ancient Roman historian Florus, describing the suppression of a rebellion in Asia Minor, says that Consul Manius Aquilius poisoned a spring, and thus took the rebellious cities. But he says that this method is still unworthy of the Romans. In the Middle Ages, they no longer thought about respect for the enemy. There was only one rule: all means are good in war. Millions died in this dark era. States exhausted by conflict suffered from large-scale epidemics. The plague alone in the middle of the 14th century reduced the population of Europe, by various estimates, by a third or a half. As some historians believe, the pandemic of the Black Death, as the disease was called in the Old World, is also the result of the use of biological weapons. This epidemic began precisely in the territory of Mongolia, where there is a natural focus. Then this disease began to spread from east to west. During the siege of Kaffa, now Feodosia, in the 14th century, the Mongols threw the bodies of those who died of the plague into the city. From there, the Genoese brought this disease to Italy by ship, and then it spread throughout Europe and eventually reached the Grand Duchy of Moscow. The actions of the Mongols became a trigger for the plague. Then the infection could no longer be stopped. It mowed down people everywhere at an incredible speed. No one knew how to fight it. Rodents, in particular rats, were carriers of this disease. But there was also an intermediate link. These were fleas. Fleas bit rats, in which the plague bacillus was located, and then they infected people. The bacterium that entered the flea triggered a very interesting mechanism. The flea became constantly hungry. This contributed to the fact that it bit more and more and more. Outbreaks of plague of varying intensity recurred throughout Europe every 10 to 15 years until the end of the 18th century. And although the inhabitants of the Old World learned from their own bitter experience the price of using such a terrible biological weapon, they themselves did not stop on another continent. In the spring of 1763, the Indians in the Great Lakes region raised an anti-British uprising, and they besieged Fort Pitt, now Pittsburgh. The position of the besieged was hopeless, and the Indians sent out 2 negotiators, asking for water and food. But the British, in order to appease the negotiators, as it were, gave them blankets and other things taken from the hospital from patients with smallpox. Such gifts were the idea of 2 Britons, Captain Simeon Ecuyer and trader William Trent. The latter even wrote about these blankets in his diary. I hope they will have the desired effect. Coincidence or not, but an epidemic broke out among the Mingo, Shawnee, and Delaware tribes. The Indians died by the hundreds. Smallpox, unlike the plague, is a viral infection. It is transmitted through the air and with the slightest contact. Viruses are interesting in that, as soon as they enter a living cell, they begin to reproduce, and accordingly, the body already becomes a factory for the production of new viral particles. When the virus enters the mucous membranes or possibly the skin, it begins to spread. That is, several particles lead to the fact that the disease begins to develop. The cause of the smallpox epidemic among the Indians is unlikely to be known. Most likely, the blankets have nothing to do with it, experts say. The negotiators could have become infected in the strangers' camp and then spread the infection among their fellow tribesmen. But the story of the medieval Norwegian biological weapon received a continuation in our time. Based on the DNA of the bones, scientists determined the age and appearance of the mysterious man from the well. Most likely, the man had blue eyes and light hair. He died at about 30 to 40 years old, and from a blow to the head with a blunt object. There were dents in the skull. But the main thing, as the genome analysis showed, the dead man was not a local resident, which means that the enemies of Sverre Sigurdsson, in order to poison the water in the royal well, probably specifically killed their own warrior.